The last sunset of November burned orange, like fire caught in dust. I was leaning against the porch frame, watching our horses breathe smoke into the cold dusk, when I saw them, moving slow, deliberate, like the land itself had summoned them. A procession of riders and elders wrapped in earth-toned cloaks and silence, their faces unreadable. I'm just a rancher, 32, with dirt under my nails and too many ghosts behind my eyes. I had no idea what they'd come to give me, let alone why. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the drought took the river and tempers flared into blood. I never held a grudge, but the land did. It kept our histories buried in the soil, only letting them breathe when the time was right. That day, something had shifted. I could feel it in my bones before a word was said. Something ancient was walking toward me. Their chief dismounted first, old hands clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle like it was something sacred. He didn't speak, just nodded and laid it on my porch, right where my dog used to sleep. I didn't touch it. Not yet. My fingers twitched at my sides, unsure if I was receiving a gift, a warning, or something else entirely. The rest of the tribe stood still. No one moved. Even the wind paused, like it too wanted to know what would happen next. I stared at the bundle, just cloth, but heavy with meaning. My heart drummed low and slow in my chest. That night, everything changed. I thought they came to thank me for something I barely remembered. But as I unwrapped the relic and looked into their eyes, I realized the truth hadn't even begun to surface. They say the West forgets nothing. The canyons hold echoes, the winds carry names, and the soil remembers the weight of every step. I was born into that memory, raised on this patch of cracked land my father carved from dust and drought. By the time I turned 32, I'd seen more storms than seasons. I thought I knew what this ranch meant. I thought I understood what was buried here, but I never expected an entire tribe to ride through my valley, bearing something older than any grudge I'd ever known. My name's Eli McCade. Folks around here just call me the last good man on Bitter Trail Ridge. It's not a compliment, it's a warning. This land's been quiet for years. No gunfire, no disputes, just the hum of windmills and the creak of old fences. I kept to myself until the tribe returned. Until the bundle hit my porch like thunder wrapped in linen. And when I finally unwrapped that sacred relic, the silence of a decade shattered. This story isn't about heroes. It's about debts unpaid, promises broken, and the strange way time circles back, dragging truth from the shadows, whether you're ready or not. I didn't ask for what came next, but I also didn't run. Before we dive into this, I just want to thank you for being here. If stories of honor, mystery, and reckoning speak to you, you're in the right place. Go ahead, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? I read everyone. Now saddle up. Because what the tribe gave me that day wasn't just a relic, it was a key, and some doors should never be opened alone. The days before the tribe came were dry and uneventful, the kind of days you forget even while you're living them. I'd wake with the sun, feed the horses, check the fencing line, maybe ride out to make sure the creek hadn't vanished entirely. Most mornings were quiet, save for the rhythmic creak of the windmill or the occasional hawk slicing through the sky. But that week, something felt off. The air held a pressure that made my skin itch. Even the animals acted strange, restless, like they knew a storm was forming that I couldn't yet see. That morning started no different. I was out in the west field, mending a wire fence that had slumped from its post. My boots were caked in mud, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. When I stood up, stretching my back, I caught a shape on the ridgeline. Just one rider. I squinted against the glare, heart thudding, trying to make out who'd come this far uninvited. We didn't get travelers out here, not unless they were lost or looking for something. The rider didn't move, just sat there, still as bone, watching. I kept my hand near the revolver on my belt, not because I meant trouble, but because I'd seen what silence and distance can hide. By the time I saddled up and rode out to meet them, the figure had turned and disappeared beyond the bluff. I followed. Not fast, not slow, just steady. There's an unspoken law out here. You don't chase, but you don't turn your back either. And if someone shows up on your land and leaves without a word, you'd better find out why. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led rather than lured. When I reached the ridge, I found nothing. No hoofprints, no broken grass, just wind and the faint scent of cedar smoke. I circled twice, listening, searching, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw the stones. 6 of them stacked neatly in a ring, no bigger than my fist. Not natural, deliberate. I dismounted, crouched down, and ran a finger along the edge of one. It was warm, too warm. Like it had been touched recently. My father once said tribes out here had their own ways of marking territory, warnings or invitations depending on the order. I'd never seen this pattern before. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind rattled the windows like knuckles knocking. Around midnight, I found myself staring at the bundle they'd left, the one I still hadn't opened. It sat on my porch, untouched. I couldn't bring it inside. Something about it felt alive, heavy in a way that went beyond weight. So I sat in my rocking chair, rifle across my lap, eyes on that cloth-wrapped mystery like it might get up and walk away if I blinked. At dawn, I broke. Curiosity outweighed caution. I stepped outside, crouched beside the bundle, and slowly unwrapped it. The fabric was rough, hand-woven, with a scent of sage and age. Inside was a relic, a carved stone disc, smooth as bone, etched with symbols I couldn't decipher. In its center was a hollow space, as if something once fit there. It pulsed faintly with warmth. I lifted it carefully. No tricks, no traps, just something sacred, ancient, and entirely out of place on my porch. I brought it inside, laid it on the kitchen table, and stared at it like it might start speaking. That's when the knock came, soft, deliberate, 3 raps against the door. I opened it slowly, heart in my throat. The rider from the ridge stood there, no longer alone. Behind him stretched a line of figures, men, women, elders, even children, spanning the length of the yard. The tribe had come. Their leader stepped forward, the same old man who'd placed the bundle days before. He looked me in the eye, then past me, to the relic on the table. Without a word, he walked inside. No fear, no hesitation, just the weight of purpose in every step. He approached the relic and placed something in the center hollow, a small, feather-wrapped stone. As soon as it clicked into place, the disc hummed low, like distant thunder. The old man turned to me and spoke the first words I'd hear from him. "It is returned, and now it will show you." Then he left, as silently as he came. No explanations, no instructions, just a truth that apparently wasn't meant to be told, only experienced. That night I dreamed of fire, not the kind that burns skin, but the kind that reshapes memory. I saw flashes of another time, battles fought in silence, vows whispered under moonlight, a blood pact sealed on this very land, and me, not as I am now, but as someone else, someone who had made a promise generations ago. I woke drenched in sweat, breath shallow, the relic glowing faintly on the table. Somehow I knew the dream wasn't a dream. It was a memory, mine, or perhaps someone else's passed down like a story too heavy to be forgotten. When the sun rose again, I found carvings on the barn wall, fresh, though I hadn't left the house all night. They matched the symbols on the relic. I traced them with shaking hands, heart pounding. This wasn't gratitude, it was inheritance. Whatever the tribe had given me, it wasn't to thank me for the past. It was to remind me of a debt, one I'd never known I owed, but was now bound to pay. The carvings haunted me. I tried to scrub them off with wire brush and water, but the marks didn't fade. Not even a scratch. It was as if the wood itself had accepted them, like the symbols had always been there and were simply waiting to surface. I stopped trying by midday. The more I stared at them, the more they rearranged themselves in my mind. Lines that first looked like jagged branches began forming paths. Circles became eyes. I didn't know the language, but my bones did. It was like recognizing the face of someone you've never met, but somehow missed your whole life. I didn't tell anyone. Not the neighboring rancher 5 miles west. Not old Pastor Brooks in town, and certainly not Sheriff Wilkes, who had a way of turning every strange thing into trouble. This was mine now, my mystery, my burden. Besides, I'd seen what men did when they didn't understand something. They either destroyed it or tried to own it. Neither seemed right. The tribe had trusted me with something sacred. The least I could do was not turn it into gossip. 3 days passed before I saw them again. Same hour, just before dusk. They arrived without sound, like ghosts riding horseback. This time they came with gifts, dried herbs, animal pelts, a jug of something that smelled like fire and age. The old man approached without speaking, placed a folded cloth in my hands, and pointed to the barn. I opened it carefully after they left. Inside was a painted map. Not of the land as it is now, but as it had been before fences and towns and rail lines, mountains where none stood, rivers long dried. A trail marked in red. I followed it at first light, left the ranch under the care of my farmhand, Jeb, telling him only that I was chasing a trail. He didn't ask questions. Jeb's the kind of man who knows better than to poke at silence. I saddled my best mare, brought a canteen, the relic, and the map. The trail led west through rock formations I'd never noticed before, shapes that mirrored the carvings on the barn wall. As I rode, I started feeling a tug, like gravity had turned sideways. The further I went, the more I felt I was being pulled by something unseen. By noon, the sun scorched the world white. I dismounted beneath a bent Joshua tree and checked the map again. The trail veered toward a narrow canyon, one I'd avoided all my life. Locals called it Whispers Hollow, though no one remembered why. The place had a reputation for swallowing up cattle and echoing voices that didn't belong to anyone. But that day, I didn't hesitate. I entered the canyon, every footstep echoed by something I couldn't see. Wind whispered things I couldn't quite catch, but they weren't threats. They sounded like warnings or invitations. Inside the hollow, the air turned cool, despite the heat above. Shadows moved unnaturally, too slow, too smooth. I came upon a small clearing where the rock walls opened up like a natural amphitheater. At its center stood a stone altar, worn by time and weather, but clearly built by hands. I dismounted, approached, and placed the relic on its surface. The moment it touched the stone, a pulse went through me, deep and low, like thunder rolling under skin. And then I saw them, not in flesh, but in flickers, faces, scenes, echoes of lives once lived. I dropped to my knees, not out of fear, but out of something older, reverence maybe. My chest tightened as I watched a vision unfold. A young boy, dressed like me, laughing beside a tribal child. They were friends, blood brothers. I saw them grow. I saw them promise to protect this land together. Then I saw betrayal, guns, fire. The boy in my image turning his back while the tribe was driven out. It wasn't me, but it was my face, my bloodline, my legacy. I came from the one who broke the vow. I sat there for hours after the vision faded, unable to move. The relic had grown cold again, the carvings no longer glowing. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me had shifted. I finally understood why the tribe had returned, not to thank me, but to remind me of a promise left to rot in the dust. And now, for reasons beyond logic, they believed I was the one to restore it. Not because I deserved to, but because I was next in the line of debt. I rode back to the ranch as the sky turned indigo. The stars watched me with unfamiliar eyes. When I arrived, Jeb was waiting. He looked at me like I'd aged 10 years in a single day. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. Just said, "The land remembers," and walked past him into the barn. I hung the map beside the carvings. They matched perfectly. and together they formed something I hadn't noticed before, a route, a path etched in both paint and symbol, leading to a place I hadn't yet reached. That night I sat on the porch, watching the wind play with dust. I held the relic in my hands and whispered something I didn't understand. Words that weren't mine, words that felt old. And the wind answered, not with sound but with presence. I felt it in my bones. The beginning had ended. The real journey was about to begin, and I wouldn't be walking it alone. 3 days passed before I made up my mind. Something about the path on that painted map had kept me awake night after night. The lines moving in my thoughts like veins under skin. I kept hearing the same word in my dreams. Anakai. Sometimes whispered, sometimes chanted. I didn't know what it meant, but I woke with it on my lips, heart pounding, like I'd just outrun something. On the 4th morning I saddled up again, this time with more than just a canteen and a map. I brought my father's journal, my grandfather's knife, and enough food to vanish for days. I told Jeb I didn't know when I'd be back. He didn't press, just nodded and handed me a wrapped biscuit like it was a talisman. If the land calls, he said, you answer polite. I rode west again, but this time I didn't need to follow the map. My body knew the way. The trail curled through the low hills behind Broken Rock Pass, where coyotes sang in strange harmony and birds flew in pairs as if escorting me. The air smelled older out there, like stone and smoke and long-buried bones. By sundown, I came upon a tree that stood alone, twisted and charred, like lightning had struck it long ago, and the land decided to keep it as a marker. Beneath its crooked limbs, I found a fire pit, still warm, though no one was there, and beside it something wrapped in leather. I dismounted and knelt. Inside the wrap was a flute made of bone and turquoise, along with a bundle of dried sage and a folded note written in strange symbols. I didn't understand the writing, but I understood the message. You're on the right path. Don't stop. I camped there for the night, the fire flickering in uneasy rhythm. The flute lay beside me, untouched. I didn't know how to play, but it felt wrong to leave it out of reach. At some point I must have drifted to sleep. I dreamed again, only this time I wasn't a witness. I was inside it. I was the boy from before, racing across the ridge with a painted feather in my hat, laughing beside someone I knew and didn't know, a girl from the tribe, her hair in twin braids, her eyes knowing. "Anakai," she said, pointing at me. "You made the promise." When I woke, I was crying. Not the loud kind. The silent kind that carves new hollows inside your chest. I packed my gear and carried the flute with reverence. As I moved deeper into the hills, I noticed the wind had shifted. It didn't whistle anymore. It hummed, low and steady, like a melody carried through canyon bones. Around noon, I reached a ridge that overlooked a wide valley, and there, in the center, stood stone pillars in a perfect circle, weathered, covered in moss, ancient, a sacred site hidden from maps and time. I tied my horse and approached on foot. The air grew thick, like the sky had come down to rest on my shoulders. Every step echoed despite the silence. In the middle of the circle, a flat stone altar rested, much like the one I'd found before. I placed the flute and relic side by side, unsure what came next. I waited. 1 hour, then 2. The sun burned straight overhead, and nothing happened. Doubt crept in. Maybe I wasn't chosen. Maybe I was chasing ghosts that didn't want to be remembered. And then a shadow passed across the altar, not from a cloud, but from a hawk that flew in perfect silence above me. It circled 3 times, then dove low before vanishing behind a ridge. In its wake, wind stirred the sage, and something whispered through the stone circle. I picked up the flute without thinking, placed it to my lips, and blew. The sound was broken at first, unsure, but as I adjusted my breath, a melody rose, ancient, familiar, full of longing. The ground pulsed beneath me. The relic warmed in my hand. Suddenly they were there, Not physically, but in presence, dozens of tribal figures, translucent like mist, surrounding the circle. I didn't stop playing, I couldn't. Each note pulled memory from the earth, raised voices from the dust. I saw the girl again, the boy again. I saw the betrayal, the broken promise, the sacred bond ripped apart. But then I saw something new, a path to restoration, a way to honor the old pact. The tribe hadn't come to punish. They'd come to remind, to awaken, to offer one last chance to make it right. When the melody ended, the vision faded like steam in morning air. The relic was cool again, but something inside it had changed. A crack had formed across its center, delicate, like a healed scar. I took it and the flute, bowed low before the altar, and turned to leave. But before I mounted up, I carved a new symbol into one of the stone pillars. A spiral wrapped in flame. I didn't know what it meant, but my hand did, and something in the air seemed to whisper, "Now you begin." I rode home, slower than I'd come. The land felt different now, alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. Trees leaned into the wind like they were listening. Rocks shimmered in the corner of my eye. I didn't know what the next step was, only that I wasn't alone anymore. The tribe was watching. The land was watching, and whatever was buried in my blood had been stirred awake. I was no longer just Eli McCade, rancher. I was Anakai, the keeper of an old vow, and the secret they had given me wasn't finished revealing itself yet. When I returned to the ranch, Jeb didn't greet me with words, just a long look and a silent nod, like he could tell I wasn't the same man who'd left. I handed him the reins and went straight to the barn. The carvings on the wall had changed again. Not more symbols, deeper ones, as if something had clawed from the inside out. The spiral I'd etched on the stone pillar now appeared here, too, burned into the wood like it had always belonged. I traced it with my fingertip and felt heat rise through my skin, like the land had accepted my mark. I placed the relic back on the kitchen table next to the flute and sat in silence until the sun dipped behind the hills. That's when the knocking came. Gentle, like before, but this time repetitive. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 2 more. I opened the door and found a child standing there, a tribal girl, no more than 10, barefoot and silent. Her face was calm, unreadable. She held out a folded piece of buckskin and didn't speak. When I reached for it, she vanished into the dusk, swallowed whole by shadows, without leaving a single footprint behind. I unwrapped the buckskin with cautious hands. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, fresher than the last, and marked with red ink shaped like a crescent. Below it, a symbol I now recognized from my dreams. 2 hands bound at the wrists, not in chains, but in cloth. It wasn't captivity, it was ceremony, a binding, a vow, and at the center of the crescent, the mark of Anakai, my mark. That's when I realized something important. The tribe hadn't simply come to deliver a relic or remind me of a forgotten debt. They were summoning me for a final rite. I packed a saddlebag by lantern light, no hesitation this time. I brought the relic, the flute, the buckskin map, and a flask of river water from behind the north field. Before I left, I stood in the doorway, staring at my ranch. The silence was different now, heavier, as if the house was holding its breath. I whispered to it, like I might to a loyal dog. "I'll be back, if I'm meant to." I didn't wake Jeb. Some paths are meant to be walked alone, and deep down I knew this one wouldn't bring me back the same man, if at all. The journey led me east this time, through terrain I barely recognized, even though it bordered land I'd ridden all my life. The trees grew taller here, denser, and the air turned cooler with each mile. Around midnight I found what the map had shown, a clearing lit by the moon, surrounded by ancient pines. In the center, a circle of flat stones and a single figure waiting beside a fire. It was the old chief, the one who had first placed the relic on my porch. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just gestured for me to sit. We didn't speak for a long time. He poured a thick liquid into a carved wooden bowl and handed it to me with both hands. I took it, drank, and felt the warmth surge through my chest like sap in spring. Then he pulled a blade from his robe, bone-handled with a red stone in its hilt, and placed it across his knees. Not threatening, sacred. He said one word: remember. And then suddenly, the fire twisted, the shadows danced, and I was somewhere else, standing in a circle of men and women, all wearing the same mark on their hands, all chanting my name. I wasn't Eli anymore. I was the boy from the visions, but older now, dressed in ceremonial leather, eyes wide with fear and pride. The chief, young in this memory, spoke in a language I understood in my blood, though I could never translate. He bound my wrist to another's, a girl's, the one from before. She smiled at me with a sadness that broke something inside. "You will protect this land," she said, "and when it forgets you, you will remind it." Then she vanished, and the fire consumed the scene in a roar of flame and wind that knocked me to my knees. I came to at dawn, shivering, the old chief gone. Only the blade remained and a symbol carved into the ground beside me, a circle broken at one end, a path unfinished. I picked up the blade and stood slowly, dizzy from what I'd seen. I didn't know where to go next, but my feet moved on their own. They carried me into the trees, through narrow paths and ancient stone markers I never knew existed. By noon, I reached a hill I'd never climbed, though it stood in plain sight from my own ranch. At its top stood a cairn, built high, untouched by weather. Inside the cairn, beneath a layer of flat stone, I found it. Another relic, this one whole. No crack, no missing piece. It pulsed in my palm, warm and steady like a second heartbeat. I placed the broken relic beside it, and they drew together like magnets, fusing with a soft glow. The earth trembled beneath me. Birds scattered, the wind stopped, and I heard her voice again, soft and near. "Now you've remembered, but will you forgive?" It wasn't just about the promise, it was about healing, the land, the tribe, my own bloodline. I descended the hill slowly, holding the joined relic in both hands like an offering. I didn't know who would be waiting, or if anyone would, but something in the air had shifted. The land felt lighter, the silence softer. As I neared home, I saw them, waiting on the edge of my ranch. Dozens, silent, watching. The girl was among them, standing beside the old chief. He nodded once, and the girl stepped forward. I knelt, holding the relic up to her. She didn't take it. Instead, she placed a single feather atop it and whispered, "The vow is whole." When the girl whispered those words, "The vow is whole," it felt like something in the sky shifted. The air turned warmer, but not from the sun. It was the kind of warmth that came from within, like a weight had been lifted not just from me, but from the very ground I stood on. The old chief stepped forward and pressed his palm to mine. His skin was rough, weathered, familiar. Then he turned it over and, with a sharp flint, made a shallow cut across my palm. No pain, only purpose. Then he made the same cut in his own and pressed our hands together. The ritual was silent, not even the wind dared to interrupt it. Behind him, the tribe knelt, every man, woman, and child lowering their heads toward the earth. I felt the heat rise through our clasped hands, like the land itself was sealing something ancient. When he released me, blood dripped into the dust, and the girl placed the joined relic into the center of that stain. It glowed bright once more, then slowly dimmed, returning to stillness. What had once been broken was now whole, and I understood finally that it was never just about the object. It was about memory, and what memory demands of those who inherit it. The tribe rose. No cheers, no celebration, only quiet nods, as if to say, "Now it's done." The old chief handed me a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside, I later found my great-grandfather's journal, aged but preserved, written not in English, but in a tribal tongue I now strangely understood. Its pages spoke of a pact, a betrayal, and a bloodline cursed to wander until it remembered its name. My name, Anakai. Not a title, not a role, but a bond. One older than my house, my town, or even the country whose flag flew nearby. They left as silently as they came. I stood alone again on my land, but it didn't feel lonely. I carried the journal to the barn, where the carvings had changed once more. They now formed a full circle, unbroken, glowing faintly in the early morning light. I placed the journal on a shelf above the relic, and the flute, like sacred tools, returned to rest. Then I walked outside, barefoot, feeling the earth under my soles. The soil was soft, forgiving. The land had accepted me again, not just as a man, but as a keeper. Over the next weeks, strange things began to happen. Not magical, just alive. Crops sprouted where soil had long refused to yield. A spring reopened behind the north field, pouring clean water over stones that hadn't been wet in decades. Wild animals came closer, unafraid. Deer grazing by the fence, hawks circling above, a bear once spotted at dawn, simply watching me as I sipped coffee on the porch. Jeb noticed too. "Place feels different," he muttered one morning, "like it's breathing again." I didn't correct him. He was right. I spent evenings playing the flute, learning one breath at a time, the melodies I'd heard in dreams. Sometimes the tribe returned to listen from a distance. I'd see them in the hills, outlined against the setting sun. No words passed between us anymore. None were needed. We had said what mattered in ritual and silence. One day, the girl approached again, older now, or maybe I had simply started seeing her differently. She handed me a carved wooden box. "For the next one," she said. And just like that, she vanished again into the dusk. I opened the box that night. Inside was a blank journal, an ink pot made of obsidian, and a quill carved from eagle bone. The implication was clear. My story wasn't done. It was just my turn to write it. I began slowly, unsure of where to begin, but the words flowed anyway, like the land itself was helping me shape them. I wrote of betrayal and healing, of memory and blood, of promises kept and others broken. I wrote not for myself, but for whoever would come after me, whoever would need to remember when the world began to forget again. Years passed. The world outside changed, railroads, telegraphs, war, but my ranch remained. A quiet sanctuary rooted in something older than maps. I married late, had one son. I told him the stories when he was old enough, but not before. He didn't always believe. That was fine. Stories don't demand belief. They wait. And when the time is right, they bloom like desert flowers after rain. He would understand when he was ready. We all do, eventually. The land sees to that. Now I sit here, old bones wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the sun dip low over Bitter Trail Ridge. The flute lies beside me, the relic sleeps on the mantle, the journal grows heavier with every passing year. I don't know if the tribe will ever return again. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they've already said all there is to say. But I still feel them. When the wind shifts, when the hawk calls, when the earth hums low beneath my boots. This land remembers, and I do too. They say not all stories need to be shouted from rooftops. Some are meant to be whispered through trees, passed from soil to skin, carried in the blood like a secret melody only a few can hear. I've come to understand that the land doesn't speak in words. It speaks in echoes, in shadows, in the weight of a promise fulfilled. And when you listen close, it doesn't forget who you are, it reminds you. Every step I take on this ranch now feels different. Not like I own it, but like I belong to it. I've stopped trying to explain that to folks in town. Most wouldn't understand. That's all right. Some truths aren't for everyone. Some are written in the wind, in stone, in silence between generations. I didn't set out to become a guardian. I didn't ask for a legacy. But when it called, I answered. And maybe one day someone else will hear that call too. Maybe they'll find the journal or the relic, or just feel the weight of something beneath their boots that makes them stop and wonder. If they do, I hope they sit down. I hope they listen. Because some gifts are never meant to be kept secret forever. Kept.